What if I told you that the most powerful decision in gospel music history wasn't made on stage, but in the quiet moment when someone chose to walk away from it? There's a man whose name you might not immediately recognize, yet his voice has moved millions. A man who stood shoulder to shoulder with gospel legends, whose baritone anchored one of the most celebrated vocal groups in Christian music, and who made a choice sorare in our fame-obsessed culture that it still leaves people stunned today. This isn't a story about rising to stardom. This is about something far more profound. It's about the courage to redefine success when the whole world is telling you you've already achieved it. Marshall Hall's story will challenge everything you think you know about what it means to truly succeed. And by the end, you might find yourself questioning your own definition of greatness. So stay with me, because what happened next in Marshall's journey revealed a truth that could transform how you see your own life's purpose. The spotlight has a gravitational pull. It draws people in, makes them feel alive, validates their worth. But here's what most people don't understand. The real test of character isn't whether you can reap the spotlight. It's whether you can walk away from it when it conflicts with what matters most. Marshall Hall understood this in a way that most artists never will. Born in Springfield, Illinois in 1970, Marshall didn't grow up dreaming off stages and applause. He grew up in Alma, where Sunday wasn't just another day. It was the day his father served as a church deacon. His mother taught Sunday school, and in the Hall household faith wasn't compartmentalized into 1 hour on Sunday morning. It was woven into the fabric of everything they did. Picture this for a moment. A modest home in the heartland of America, with a smell of Sunday dinner mingles with the sound of hymns being practiced around an old piano. That was Marshall's childhood. And here's what's crucial to understand, because this shaped everything that came after. Marshall didn't learn music as a performance art first. He learned it as a language of worship, as a conversation with the divine, as something sacred before it was ever entertaining. Young Marshall would sit in those church services, not just listening, but absorbing. He watched how music could transform a room, how the right melody could open hearts that had been closed, how harmony could create unity among people who disagreed on everything else. Music in Marshall's world was never just sound. It was ministry. It was connection. It was purpose. And this is where his story diverges from so many others who enter the music industry. While other kids might have been dreaming of record deals and radio play, teenage Marshall was leading worship at this local church, writing songs not for charts, but for hearts. He once reflected on those early days with striking humility. "I wasn't trying to be famous or anything. I just wanted Tao's music to help people connect with God." Now, think about that statement for a second. In a culture where everyone is hustling for visibility, where social media has turned us all into personal brand managers, here was someone whose primary motivation was service, not recognition. This was false modesty, or some rehearsed line for interviews. This was the foundational principle that would guide every major decision Marshall would make for the rest of his life. The songs Marshall wrote in those small sanctuaries were different. They weren't trying to be catchy. They weren't designed to climb any charts. They were raw, honest expressions of faith filled with spiritual depth that came from genuine wrestling with belief, doubt, hope, and grace. These weren't the polished radio-friendly songs that dominate Christian music today. These were prayers set to melody, meditations on what it means to trust God when life doesn't make sense, reflections on grace that transforms ordinary moments into sacred ones. And people noticed, not because Marshall was self-promoting, but because authenticity has a way of cutting through noise. His talent for capturing the unvarnished emotions of faith in song began to draw attention beyond his small church community. But here's what makes this part of the story so important. Success found Marshall. He didn't chase it. There's a massive difference between those two paths, and it would define everything about his career. After high school, Marshall made his way to Nashville, the beating heart of Christian music in America. But his journey to Music City wasn't like the thousands of others who arrived there every year with stars in their eyes and demo tapes in their hands. Marshall came quietly, humbly, without the fanfare or desperate hunger for fame that characterizes so many artists who make that pilgrimage. And what did he do when got there? He became a background vocalist. Think about that. Here's a man with genuine talent, with songwriting ability, with a voice that could carry a lead, and he chose to serve in the shows. He lent his rich baritone to albums by some of the biggest names in Christian and gospel music, adding depth and warmth to their melodies, bringing their songs to life with his steady, smooth vocals. Most people would see background work as a stepping stone, something to endure until you get your big break. Marshall saw it as his calling in that season. He wasn't impatiently waiting for his moment. He was faithfully serving in the moment he had been given. Here's a principle that changes everything when you really grok it. Faithfulness in obscurity is what prepares you for responsibility and visibility. Marshall was learning the industry, honing his craft, developing his character, building relationships, all while staying true to his calling off musical ministry. He wasn't networking with ulterior motives. He wasn't trying to use people as stepping stones. He was simply being excellent at what he did, showing up with professionalism and heart, earning a reputation, not for being the most talented or the most ambitious, but for being the most dependable and genuine. Studio work also gave Marshall the space to develop his songwriting. His compositions continue at OB prayers in motion, never chasing commercial success or catchy hooks, but exploring themes of faith, hope, and grace with increasing depth. He was storing up spiritual and creative reserves, preparing for something he could yet see, but was being prepared for nonetheless. Then came 2004, and the call that would change everything. Bill Gaither, a living legend in gospel music, invited Marshall to join the Gaither Vocal Band. Now, if you know anything about Christian music, you understand the magnitude of this invitation. The Gaither Vocal Band was just another group. It was an institution. They were known for rich harmonies that could make you weep, uplifting melodies that could lift the heaviest spirits, and performances that left audiences transformed. To be invited into this group wasn't just a career opportunity, it was, as Marshall understood it, a ministry calling. And this distinction matters enormously. When you view your work as merely a job, you show up differently than when you view it as a calling. When it's just a career move, you're thinking about what you can get from it. When it's a calling, you're thinking about what you can give through it. Marshall joined the band and something remarkable happened. His mellow baritone didn't just blend with other voices. It became essential to their sound. He stood alongside powerhouses like Gia Penrod with his commanding vocals, and David Phelps with his soaring tenor, and Marshall's voice was the steady foundation that allowed their brilliance to shine. Here's what's fascinating about Marshall's role in the group. He never tried to compete with the showmanship around him. In a lineup of extraordinary talents and strong personalities, Marshall brought something different. He brought steadiness. He brought calm. He brought emotional depth without drama, power without pretense. His bandmates would later describe how his presence had a settling effect, how his quiet strength balanced the group's energy, how he held things together not by dominating, but by simply being fully present and fully himself. The songs Marshall performed with the Gaither Vocal Band became classics. Yes, I Know, Loving God, Loving Each Other, Glorious and Possible. When Marshall sang these songs, something happened. There were no vocal gymnastics for show, no manufactured emotion, no performance tricks designed to manipulate an audience response, just truth delivered with sincerity and depth. Just worship offered with a whole heart. Just ministry carried out with excellence and humility. Audiences could feel the difference when Marshall sang. You weren't watching a performance, you were being invited into worship. And here's a crucial insight about why his approach was so powerful in a culture saturated with spectacle. Authenticity becomes magnetic. We're so accustomed to being sold to, performed at, manipulated be calculated emotional appeal that when we encounter someone who is simply being genuine, it stops us in our tracks. For 5 years, Marshall toured with the Gaither Vocal Band. 5 years of stages and spotlights, of recording sessions and television appearances, of touching lives and seeing God move through music. The group traveled constantly performing for packed venues across the nation and beyond. Marshall became a familiar face to thousands of gospel music fans. His voice was heard in homes, churches, and cars across America. By any conventional measure, this was the peak. This was what success looked like. This was the dream realized. And then in 2009, at the absolute height of his time with the band, Marshall made a decision that shocked everyone. He quietly announced that he was leaving the group. Fans were confused. His bandmates were surprised. The industry was baffled. Why would someone walk away when everything looked so perfect? What could possibly make someone leave when they were experiencing the kind of success most artists only dream about? Here's where we need to pause and really sit with what happened next. Because this is the heart of Marshall's story, and the reason it matters so much. The answer wasn't scandal. It wasn't burnout. It wasn't artistic differences, or a better offer from another group. The answer was profoundly simple, and yet radically countercultural. Marshall chose his family over his fame. He chose his calling over his career. He chose obedience to what he felt God asking of him over the ambition to keep climbing. And in making that choice, Marshall revealed something that our culture desperately needs to understand. Sometimes the most significant thing you can do is step back, not step up. Sometimes strength looks like saying no to good things in order to say yes to the most important things. Sometimes the truest measure of success isn't what you achieve, but what you're willing to sacrifice for what matters most. Marshall had been honest with himself about the cost of his success. The constant touring meant missing bedtimes and school plays, birthdays, and ordinary Tuesday evenings. The demands of recording and performing meant his energy and attention were always divided. He could be physically present at home between tours, but mentally still on the road, emotionally depleted for giving himself to audiences. His children were growing up, and he was watching it happen in snapshots rather than experiencing it in the day-to-day moments that actually form a childhood. His marriage, while strong, was bearing the strain of his absence. And Marshall looked at his life with brutal honesty and asked himself a question that every person needs to ask at some point. What do I want to be known for when my leaf is over? What will matter most? What legacy am I actually building? The decision Marshall faced isn't unique to famous musicians. It's the same decision countless people face in different forms. The executive who has to choose between the promotion that requires relocating or staying near an aging parent. The entrepreneur who has to decide whether to scale the business or scale back for the sake of their marriage. The professional who has to weigh career advancement against being present for their kids' formative years. Marshall's decision was made on a bigger stage. But the principle applies universally. You cannot serve two masters. And you will eventually have to choose what you value most. What made Marshall's choice so remarkable wasn't just that he chose family. It's that he chose it when the cost was so visible. He wasn't leaving a job he hated. He was leaving a position he loved, a ministry valued, a platform he'd worked years to reach. The sacrifice was real. The loss was tangible. And he chose it anyway because he had clarity about his priorities. Think about the courage that required in an industry that measures worth by visibility and validates significance through success. Marshall walked away from both. He knew people would question his decision. He knew some would see it as throwing away an opportunity. He knew the music would continue without him, that someone else would fill his spot, that the spotlight would move on. And had chose his family anyway. He chose presence over prominence. He chose the slow, quiet work of fatherhood and marriage over the adrenaline of stage and applause. This wasn't about Marshall not valuing his work with the Gaither Vocal Band. He treasured those years. It wasn't about him not recognizing the impact of that ministry. He knew lives were being touched, but he also